access the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Ho, 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 Green Lantern fans. We're back for episode number 253 of the podcast of OA. I'm your host, Myron Rumsey, and I'm joined by my friend on the other end, Mr. Phil Bova, who is looking very festive this evening.
But I'm representing different methods here, so, you know.
So I know that this time of year you love to do Larfleeze cookies. Have you done them yet?
Haven't done them yet, but I did start my dough. So I did gingerbread dough yesterday, so it's chilling. And then I got to do some press cookie stuff, and then I'll probably do my Larfleeze cookies next week.
Gotcha. Yeah, I haven't done mine yet either. I'm very behind. I just put my Christmas tree up today and I haven't decorated it yet, but I've got the tree up finally.
It's oddly enough, one of the very few cookie trees or cookies around Christmas that has orange in it, you know?
Yeah, I can see that though.
And they used to do a thing where they put oranges in your stockings.
Yeah, I remember as a kid getting an orange in the toe of my stocking every year.
So it's kind of funny, but you don't see much orange stuff associated with Christmas at all.
Yeah, it's true.
Wow.
True.
Whatever. Larfleeze rocks. It ought to be a Larfleeze Christmas every year.
Oh yeah, it was funny. James Gunn on social media was asking for suggestions for Christmas stories from the comics to make animated films out of.
Oh man,
myself and a number of people were like, Larfleeze Christmas special. I mean, it's a slam dunk. It's humorous. It's a little scary. Has a great underlying Christmas message. Be perfect.
Yeah,
but,
I mean it's prime. It's prime. I mean, you could just do that all day long.
Oh yeah.
It'd be like one of those ones that remain in the iconic, like pantheons of your childhood, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer does.
Mm-hmm.
The Larfleeze Christmas special would be that, you know.
Yeah, it could be an annual thing, right? You try it out every year, and
I've always been a big fan of Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. Oh God.
That's one you don't see a whole lot of.
Yeah, you don't. I grew up with that, watching HBO in the early phases of HBO. Like the real early phases when you bought like HBO Max and Showtime for like $7 or something like that.
Back in the day, yeah.
That's right.
Well, I am jazzed about this episode because this year, 20-year anniversary of Green Lantern Rebirth. We haven't done anything with it yet. The anniversary was technically in October, but we're going to do a little bit of a retrospective, talk about the times, what led to this event, and obviously the story itself. But before we get into that, as always, we like to talk about Green Lantern news. There's not a whole lot right now in terms of the Lanterns TV show. James Gunn has been doing a number of interviews, and he's kind of reinforcing the grounded version of Green Lantern. He made a comment that most of Green Lantern's adventures took place on Earth, which I'm not sure if I agree with that one. But yeah, that was the look I had too, Phil.
That doesn't make any sense. I mean, I could understand making that comment if you didn't educate yourself in the mythology and go through different writers over the course of generations. But as far as a topical comment, it still doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, I mean, a fair number of them did take place on Earth. I mean, I guess you could argue that a good chunk of Blackest Night and Sinestro Corps War all took place on Earth. A lot of Hal's early adventures took place on Earth. But I gotta say it's probably closer to at least a 50-50 split.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know, man. I've just always been even though Hal Jordan, has been my favorite in Jessica Cruz and all them, I still just have this firm belief that it's a Green Lantern should be based out of space. I see it as more of a space concept that has a lot of different things.
It goes back to the, when you think about Green Lantern, grounded and realistic are not two words that are traditionally used when we describe Green Lantern. And some people look at grounded as being code speak for we don't have the budget to do a lot of space visual effects. But who knows, right?
It's not the time to make it then, obviously. But
right.
I mean, that being said, I figured this would be like a Firefly kind of, Firefly.
Maybe, yeah, could be.
Whatever.
To me, it's go big or go home. And the other thing was Aaron Pierre has made some comments in interviews and on social media about the research he's doing to play Jon Stewart, and that he's, really excited about bringing the character to life, which is good, which is good.
Well,
Uh,
it's his first it's the first incantation of him on a live screen. I mean, other
yeah,
than that CGI version that floated around with the Snyder cut thing.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, this is the first, you know, it's going to be a pinnacle presentation of the character. I mean, I'm sure he'll get it right.
Yeah, if I have doubts about the show, it doesn't have anything to do with him.
No, me neither.
But
I'm sure whoever they choose to pick that role, I'm sure they're going to do fine.
yep. Off the panel, speaking of Jon Stewart, there was a DC Christmas book called Batman Smells, Robin Laid an Egg, #1. Had a Jon Stewart story in it. All I can say is thank goodness it's not a continuity story. But he's in it. If you're looking for a little bit of a Green Lantern story, it's in there. I always find those specials kind of interesting because it's like they use them to try new writers and stuff, and so the quality of them isn't usually all that great. This one had at least a story by Marv Wolfman in it, so the quality could be a little higher than normal. But this one, the art wasn't so hot. I thought the story was a little silly, but some people might like it. So if you want to get in the holiday spirit, it might be something to look at.
To
Uh,
each their own.
that's exactly right. So we're not even going to bother taking a pause because that was rather short. Let's jump right into Green Lantern Rebirth. So
Mm.
I kind of wanted to before I got into the story, and you and I were, it was funny. You and I were tweeting, or not tweeting, but texting each other pictures from the book from the 6-issue series today as we were both rereading it and prepping for the episode. And it was I pull out Green Lantern Rebirth probably every year or so to read it because when I find myself maybe not being as motivated or what have you, it's a great motivator because it gets me jazzed back up. But looking back on the story at the time, I mean, this came out in 2004. You've got to rewind the clock about 5 years to see where narratively they were going with some of this stuff. And I don't think it was premeditated back in 1999, but certainly the groundwork was being laid for things. As a card carrying member of Heat, the pressure was still on from the fans that we wanted the Green Lantern mythos back. We wanted Hal exonerated. That pressure was still ongoing. In 1999, Jeff Johns, a relatively newcomer to DC Comics, wrote an event. It was DC's Day of Judgment. And it was basically the crux of the story was the Spectre didn't have a host. The Spectre needed a new host. And originally, Jeff Johns pitched to DC that he wanted to bring Hal Jordan back through the story as a human without a power ring, and that he wanted to make the Enchantress the Spectre. Editorial kind of looking at all of these fans want Hal Jordan back. Let's give him a role so maybe we can do something with him because at that point, the Green Lantern series was still selling, relatively well. So let's make Hal the Spectre, and we can give him a series, and then those fans will get what they want. So that's what happened. It would have been interesting to have seen what they did if the Enchantress became the Spectre. That would have been kind of cool.
A female Spectre would have been a different take,
Yeah, would have been very interesting.
Yeah.
Jump forward a couple more years, and Legacy, the last will and testament of Hal Jordan, comes out in 2001. If you haven't read that one, to me, that's a must read of the overall story because it revolves really around Tom Kalmaku. He's really the star of the book. And it talks about how he deals with the ramifications of being Hal's confidant for those years and really having a hard time getting on with his life and his life falling to shambles. And a young version of Hal shows up, which looks like it's, little baby Hal, and basically sends Tom on a mission. And by the end of the issue, by the end of this graphic novel, Oa is back and Kilowog is back. And it's basically using a power ring that Hal bequeaths to Tom with enough energy to do all that. So again, remnants of Hal maybe having some semblance of control before he went off and did what he did when it comes to Final Night and all that. Jump forward again to 2002. Dan Didio is starting at DC Comics. The Green Lantern book has slipped considerably in the last year or so. It's still hovering around the 50 spot line. Sales numbers by today's standards would be considered high, but for the standards back in the day and that time era. They were not particularly all that great. Peter Tomasi, an editor at DC Comics, proposes to Dan Didio that maybe they reset Green Lantern again and they bring Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps back. Didio thinks it's great. Didio and Tomasi approach Jeff Johns and he does a pitch. Before all that takes place, though, in issue 150, Kal Rayner brings back the Guardians by giving it the power of Ion. So you've got a little window of time in between the 2002 and when this story comes out. And then they wind down that story and they launch Green Lantern Rebirth. And at that time, remember, Jeff Johns is Jeff Johns, but he's not the Jeff Johns. You know, he's done JSA, he's done some of the Flash. He did Star and Stripe, obviously, at that point, because that was his first real beginning.
He did Flash Rebirth prior to this.
No, Flash Rebirth came after.
Oh, that's right. You're right. Yep. It did.
Yeah. It's interesting. I interviewed Ethan Van Sciver 10 years ago. Ethan Van Sciver, who did the artwork on Green Lantern Rebirth, was at a comic book con here in my local town. Happened to be my 50th birthday. So I had him do a sketch or a picture for me. And then I got to do a panel at the convention, which Bill and I recorded as an episode of the podcast of OA. And when we were talking to him, he said the difference between Green Lantern Rebirth and Flash Rebirth was in 2004, basically editorial said to Jeff Johns and Ethan Van Sciver, you guys can do whatever you want. You know, we don't care. Just reset it. You know, and there was a proposal for a 5-issue series, which turns into a 6. And he said when they got ready to do Flash Rebirth a few years later, editorial wanted a lot more control. Like they wanted to, they felt they could manipulate reality. I don't want to say manipulate reality. That's probably too much of a strong choice of words. They felt they could influence the development of the story and get the same kind of lightning in a bottle they got with Green Lantern Rebirth. Whereas in Green Lantern Rebirth, I think part of the reason why they got lightning in a bottle was they stepped out of the way and let Ethan Van Sciver and Jeff Johns cook. But yeah, that was one of the things he said during that point. It's funny. I remember that interview and I was just rewatching it yesterday as I was prepping for the show. One of the things he said that when Jeff was writing the original script, Sinestro was not a part of it.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, it would have been a lot different.
It would have been a little bit flatter, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And what Van Sciver said is you can't bring back Luke Skywalker without bringing back Darth Vader.
Fair analogy.
Yeah. And really, when you think about it, Sinestro is kind of the poster boy for the cautionary tale of letting the power go to your head. And Emerald Twilight kind of really, it overwrote Sinestro and it made Sinestro less valuable as a character. So bringing him back and making him ultimately responsible for Hal's downfall was a great stroke.
Well, not only that, but if you're going to bring back Hal Jordan, you got to find a way to segue into bringing back Sinestro. Because at some point he's going to have to appear. Yeah. And the way they did it in this book was actually pretty good. I mean, obviously he didn't die when he got his neck broken by Hal, but you knew back then it's different when you know it, when a character dies. I mean, predating that, you know, when Superman died, it was like, oh my gosh, what happens? Big news. Nowadays, somebody dies, it's like, all right, well, we'll see him again down the line. Next.
It's always air quote death. Yeah. I own the Absolute edition and I highly recommend it for those that love the story. The artwork just pops with the expanded pages. And one of the things it has in the back is Jeff Johns' original 5-issue proposal. And there's some really interesting differences between that and what we got. One of the things was, you know, in the actual story, at one point, Parallax infects Ganthet. In the original story, Parallax was going to infect the Spectre.
Oh, yeah, that would have been kind of cool.
And then once that purges, he was going to then infect Batman. So Batman was then going to shoot Robin with a gun. And then he tries to leap back to Hal and he finds no fear to be able to help him infect Hal. But Batman, having gone through and experiencing what it was like to be possessed by Parallax, actually ends up apologizing to Hal.
Boo.
And another thing that was interesting was that Hal and his father have a major arc in this story where he when he's hurt and can't use his power ring, he makes his way to his father's house, and he and his father kind of reconcile. And his father takes Kyle to, because he was worked with the government, he apparently knew where a JLA boom tubey type teleporter was. He gets Kyle to the satellite and he goes with him. So there's a whole little mini arc with Kyle and his father that are taken away. So it's interesting to compare that to what we actually got. And again, originally it was only going to be 5 issues,
And then it turned into 6.
turned into 6. And I don't think that DC really knew what the response was going to be, because like the first issue had 4 printings
Yeah,
because it sold like gangbusters.
I remember it was kind of big when it came out. Well, because everybody wanted Hal back, right? I mean, everybody,
Yeah, I mean,
he needed to be back. He needed to be back in the fold with everybody else. I mean, because popularity was rising again,
mhm.
you know. So,
Well, he never really had been, I mean, he didn't have a book, but he made guest appearances as Parallax, then he made guest appearances as Hal and flashback sequences. So it wasn't like he really went away, but there was a yearning for the mythos to be restored. I mean, one of the things, again, I talk about the fact that I was part of Heat. I didn't join Heat from day one. I joined it several years later when Emerald Twilight came out in 1994. My son was 2 years old. I mean, you have a young child about in the same age bracket, similar age bracket. You know how much work that is raising a child at that age.
mm,
I was my reading of comics had waned down to just Green Lantern, and I dropped it after Emerald Twilight after about a year and didn't look back. And it wasn't a major part of my life. But then a couple of years later, son got a little older, went off to school. It became important to me again, and that's when I joined Heat. And at the time, it was about exonerating Hal, but it was more about getting the mythos back. It was more about getting the core back, because that's what set it aside. I think one of the things that didn't resonate for me with Kyle was that if you take away the Green Lantern Corps and that whole mythology that they used to relaunch the Green Lantern concept of the Silver Age, Kyle just becomes another superhero.
right.
What makes Green Lantern unique is the whole core concept. And I would argue one of the reasons why I think it doesn't resonate as much now is because we have too many Green Lanterns. It should be a unique thing. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be like, that easy. One of the things that happens in this book is we find out that it's not that easy to use a power ring. Green Arrow tries to use the power ring and really can. It should not be that easy.
Well, not only that, but Johns also takes a step even further by distinguishing what ring and its association with its wearer, and subsequently where its power reaches, like where its power and strengths are. I mean, he fleshes it out with Kyle, about being artistic. He fleshes it out with John Stewart about being mechanical. You can see all the nuts and bolts or whatever. He actually explains the difference in the rings. He even explains gardeners.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the neat things near the end of the book is when we start seeing all 4 of them together with Kilowog. The differences that makes them each unique. They're using the same tool, but in different ways.
Right,
And the way they use it reflects their personality. With John Stewart, he talks about it building the constructs from the inside out. And
right.
that Kyle is more of an artistic type and he's never happy with what he does. And I thought that was kind of a neat thing. It's hard to maintain that when you start adding a whole ton more characters, but I thought it had a great deal of originality to it.
Well,
It's
but I mean, if you're gonna do that, it takes notation after notation. You gotta stick with the narrative, stick with the narrative.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that's an unfortunate loss when it comes to the Green Lantern Corps stuff is that kind of approach to the rings. I kind of feel like the rings now have kind of like their own identity and they're just kind of thrown around willy-nilly. And well, let's make the ring do this. Let's have the ring do, oh, well, let's
Well,
have this guy do this special thing with this ring.
yeah.
I mean,
It seems like the rings are unique, not the person who wears them, which makes the characters even more generic. It's,
right. And
this
this
person's
doesn't
got a
approach
special,
it that way. This
right.
this is totally the opposite of that.
Yeah, the ring is a tool,
Right.
and how they use the tool is different. Whereas, right now it seems like, well, this person's got a special ring that does this, and you're exactly right. So it makes it a little, I think it makes it less important than it should be, or less original than it should be.
But
Back
I
in the
wonder,
day, go ahead.
but I wonder, like, I mean, there's really not no set template or blueprint on what a ring is and isn't supposed to do. So obviously, up creator differences is
Oh yeah,
usually at play when it comes to that. But at its core, you still can't lose the initial concept itself, right? I mean, it'd be like the same thing with like Superman and his cape, you know?
Well, it's like, if you go back to the Silver Age stories, John Broome, whatever the story called for, the ring could do suddenly, right?
Right.
So there's never been a hard, fast continuity, for better or
Gotcha.
worse.
Yeah, I
Uh,
kind of figured that. Yeah.
One of the things I think that the fandom was concerned about when this book was announced was that, well, they're going to kill Kyle off. And there are stories that DC told Jeff Johns that he could kill Kyle, and that Johns was like, no, that would, why would I do that to Kyle fans and let them go through what Hal fans went through? And I think he saw it as being very important that Kyle and Hal support each other. I mean, Hal wouldn't be back if it wasn't for Kyle.
Well, not
So
only that, Kyle's part of the backup story at the beginning, you know?
yes, yes. Yeah, yeah, that little extra thing they had in the beginning. Kyle is critical, and it was important that Kyle is the one that brings him back, because we're again bridging the new to the newer again, right? We went from the Hal Jordan stories of old to the Kyle Rayner stories. We didn't have a real proper handing off. This needed to be symbolic, and Johns uses Kyle basically to help exonerate Hal, which I think
Right.
is important too, because you had some of it being the voice of different parts of the fandom. Well, Batman was certainly the voice of people who didn't want Hal Jordan back.
Sure.
I think when you look at the story, I think Green Lantern Rebirth was a story that was written for the fans who, like myself, who longed for the return of the mythology, and I think it really succeeded. It's funny. There was a post on social media today. Somebody considered Emerald, excuse me, Green Lantern Rebirth one of the top worst retcons in history. And I was like, man, I don't know what you're drinking, but
I mean, I wouldn't even put that in a category with that.
oh gosh, no. I mean,
What's the point of that?
right, right. It's interesting. I'm sure there are people who are not happy with what's happened with Kyle since Hal came back. The problem has been with Kyle is he doesn't have that uniqueness anymore. And now he becomes, as you and I have said before, he becomes just another Green Lantern in the background. I think though, with what Adams is doing and him at least temporarily being the White Lantern, I think that will kind of maybe set some of that in the right direction that people have been wanting. I think that Kyle's time during the Johns era is, he co-starred in the Green Lantern Corps book, and he had his own run in Green Lantern New Guardians. I think it's hard to say he wasn't treated well. I think it kind of dropped the ball with the White Lantern stuff near the end, but
I wouldn't mind seeing a Kyle Rayner, Larfleeze team up. You know,
it could be interesting. The two of them like
the
a
orange
buddy
and a
cop
white
thing.
together, you know?
Yeah, it could be interesting. There's all kinds of things, and then the way this story starts out, I don't know if I want to go through this page by page because it's 6 issues.
No, we don't need to do that. We can flesh over it.
But the way the story starts out is that Hal and the Spectre are at odds. I mean, you've got scenes where Hal as the Spectre are doing things like destroying Black Hand's hand, and you find Hal having a hard time keeping Parallax at bay because Hal has bonded with the Spectre because he wants to make him the spirit of redemption, not the spirit of God's wrath. And what we actually find out in the story is that the Spectre chose Hal because he sensed Parallax there, and by bonding with Hal would keep Parallax at bay, and then maybe he could, as he called it, burn Parallax up to the point at which Hal would be free. He was trying to save Hal's soul.
Sure.
And in the proposal for the story, what Jeff Johns says is that Parallax is actually starting to corrupt the Spectre, and that's what's actually going on behind the scenes. The Spectre is getting corrupted. And so all heck is going to break loose, because if Parallax gets control of the Spectre, to quote Aliens, it's game over, man, game over, right?
It would have made for a cool story.
Oh, it would have been a really neat a
Tough to
neat
write, but
event.
cool.
Oh yeah, yeah, it definitely. And it's interesting. John's also, there's a part here where Guy is giving John Stewart some garbage. I shouldn't say garbage. He's giving him some crap. And he talks about how John doesn't stand up for himself anymore. And John's kind of alludes to the whole explosion on Zanshi thing. He doesn't say it, but Guy Gardner says, you made a mistake and now you don't trust yourself anymore. And I thought that was kind of a neat way to explain how John went from being this type of character to being more like the DC Justice League cartoon version of John Stewart. So
Sure.
I thought that was kind of neat. And you can also see sprinkled throughout this entire thing seeds of Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night. And to read the lore behind Jeff Johns' run, supposedly he plotted out Rebirth and Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night as his Star Wars Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi of the Green Lantern universe. And so some of those seeds are sprinkled. I mean, in the very beginning, you see the Sinestro Corps logo before we even know there's a Sinestro Corps.
Well, not only
Have
that, but Black Hand,
exactly Black Hand. So that's neat, and you even see in that little preamble that the aliens, when they're talking to Kyle, and Kyle's ring isn't able to translate the alien language to English very well, that the symbols that it's showing is they're showing the Parallax Sinestro Corps logo.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't pick up on that until a couple read throughs, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. When Hal shows up at Ollie's and he's dealing with the Black Hand thing, you can see the Sinestro Corps logo as well. Uh, so the collaboration, I think, between Ethan Van Sciver, think of him what you will in his recent activities in the last 8 years or so. He totally nailed it when it comes to this,
Art,
and
yeah,
did a ton of great
art,
design work.
yeah, the art is fantastic, and some of the pages. I mean, you and I were going back and forth, sending different pages, to one another, and some of his. I mean, they're just big, and they have a lot happening in them.
Yeah, well, and one of the things about his art style is he's very detailed. There are a few camera angles that where the faces maybe look a little off, little things here and there, but it's one of the things where he wanted the uniform to be made out of energy, and so he drew it that way, which is why you don't see a lot of detail in the black areas and such. Again, when I interviewed him about 10 years ago, one of the things he said that was that when he takes to writing a character, or not writing, when he's drawing a character that he's not drawn before or whatever, he goes back and looks at the original source material and looks at it like, well, what was the original artist trying to convey with their character design, and pay homage to that. So you can see where, they gave Hal a new look with, curtailing the swim trunks. One of the things that Van Sciver did is he angled the gloves and he angled the boots, which didn't stick for very long. He came up with the idea of the lantern logo popping off of the uniform, kind of like a siren,
Hmm.
which I thought was kind of neat. Not a siren, but the lights, which I thought was kind of neat. He just did some really good design work. He took Black Hand, who was pretty much a jokery. I want to say Joker, not as in the Joker. He was not a very serious character.
He was a buffoon.
Yeah, yeah, good choice of words. He was a buffoon. Definitely isn't a buffoon here. Hector Hammond is crazy creepy.
Yeah, big time creepy. And you know what? The humane side of Jordan, from point A to point to the ending of this. I mean, Jordan's on a journey, and I think it's safe to assume, and I don't want it overlooked, or I don't want it oversimplified, that this was a big journey for him to go on internally to come out to the other side to prove to people what kind of, I would have to say, person that he actually is. And the only reason I say that is because, and I'm not trying to bring this up because of personal beef, but I mean him and Batman are at odds, and Bruce Wayne has been known to never trust anybody, right? Period. End of discussion. I don't care what you got to earn or not, he still never trusts anybody. Let alone somebody like this who's done all the things that he's done, right? And I think a hard part of that is conveyed in Jordan's journey and path through a lot of his stuff, because he has a lot of moments in here where he's reflective. And I think that's important for him as a ground build,
Yeah,
which, like I told you in a text earlier today, this could be a good ground build for your whole Green Lantern universe off of this.
sure.
If you're of the creative mind that Hal Jordan's going to be your centralized character, you still have, John Stewart, and you still have all these other elements in there, so nothing's going to be missed by it. But what you gain by doing this is fleshing out the stuff that happened prior in sequence and flashbacks, laying groundwork for stuff that's going to happen in the future, right? And you also have a bunch of side tentacles that you can tell stories off of things that happened in here going on in your DC universe as a collective.
Well, and the whole story reads cinematically too, right?
Yeah.
It reads like a movie in some ways, and it gives you, as you said, enough backstory that you don't have to have read everything else
Mm-mm.
to start here.
Right.
Yeah, you don't hit all the detail, but you don't have to have it. I think that's why so many people jumped on the Green Lantern bandwagon during the Johns era, and they haven't read much before that because it was such a great jumping on point.
Well, see, what's baffled me about people with details and their beef with that is, I mean, I think what they often overlook is you can go find those details yourself. I mean,
Right,
I mean, if
right.
you're, I mean, if you're going to look at the story, you're going to say, well, they didn't provide enough of this, or where did this come from, or what is that? I shouldn't. They should explain this more. Well, go do the groundwork. I mean, the common theme is Google it. It's not that hard. If somebody out there has done the groundwork for you, all you got to do is look at it,
Hmm.
just to educate yourself in ways that you might have missed over things, you
Hmm.
know? And I've never understood that beef with people when they say it, oh, it doesn't do this or it doesn't do that. I think most writers are cognizant enough to have enough material, even simplistically, but know enough to know to go look for the other branches yourself if you choose to pick up on more information.
Right. It's interesting in that I think Johns did a lot of, as you said, a lot of thinking about, well, what is Hal like as a human being, and where did he in his publishing history start to deviate? And let's start making some of those changes stick then. So he goes all the way back to the indecisiveness of the late Silver Age when Hal didn't know what he was doing or where he was going. He shows some of that then, and then when he get to volume 3, that's when it really jumps into full play. And it's after he uses Sinestro. Sinestro was killed at that point. His soul was imprisoned in the power battery. He strikes up a conversation in accord with Parallax and basically gets Parallax out of his stupor that he was in the central power battery. And the two of them together basically undermine Hal. And Sinestro gets to watch from the sidelines as his greatest adversary finally gets to feel what he felt when he fell from grace. It all fits.
Well, and not only that, you got the Guardians, right?
Sure.
And not only the Guardians, but the fallacies, because moving forward lays the path and the groundwork for um I guess you could say all the Corps' reservations with the Guardians
Mhm.
because their relationships become kind of crappy after that. They just kind of become the end of a the end of a bad joke, so to speak. We're not going to
Right.
listen to you. We're going to do the F we want later.
There were some things like there were some really key moments, and you and I were sending pictures to each other as we commented earlier. The moments where like John Stewart calls Batman out because Batman has given Hal garbage and
Mm,
disrespecting Hal. And in the beginning of the book, John talks about Hal in a way that's very reverential, in that he didn't always have a plan, but if we were backed up against the wall and look like there was no way out, and Hal said we were going to make it, I trusted him that we were going to make it. And that happens again near the end of the story when they're all going against Parallax. And he's like, "What's the plan?" They say to Hal, and he's like, "Well, we figured it out on the way there. Do you trust me?" And John is like, "Absolutely." In that other moment when he calls out Batman, Batman is given, he's disrespecting Hal because he doesn't trust him, and he's never been happy with Hal's. Not that we've seen a lot of that in the page, but John is like, "Would you just shut the hell up?" You don't like the fact that he doesn't buy in what you were selling, and I was thought that was so perfect. I think had Johns done the original thing where Batman apologized, you would have lost some of that tension that has existed since then. So I think it was a smart thing to change it. And when it gets to the end and he tries to call Hal out and puts his hand on Hal's shoulder, you and I, it's one of our favorite scenes in the entire 62 series where Batman gets clocked by Hal and
mm.
knocked on his backside. And then later on, he says to Hal, "Is this supposed to be just okay?" And Hal's like, "I don't really care what you think." I was like,
I want to find somebody that knows how to like artistically do that really well, and I want
yeah.
to make that one of my entire walls just be a that panel. And it could be right here in front of me where I'm sitting because it's an easy paintable wall.
There's some other really cool touches. A couple of things I wanted to bring up was there's the scene with Hal and Carol at Ferris Aircraft, and Hal brings back Ferris Aircraft, revitalizes it as a gift to Carol, even
Mhm.
though Carol has moved on and Hal has accepted it. But I was going back today and looking at it, and I was like, Hal's got on the flight jacket, right? He has a yellow shirt on underneath the jacket. And I was like, that's really kind of a neat way of showing us that he's still enshrouded by the fear entity at this point
Yeah,
because it's yellow. I
right.
thought that was slick. And then there was another spot where I can't remember just now who said it, but the quote from the story was, "Hope is meaningless against fear." And I thought, boy, you jump to the emotional spectrum, and blue can't do anything against fear by itself. I thought, boy, is this John's continuing to plant some of those little seeds that maybe you never pick up on? Uh,
Or in hindsight, you look at it,
sure,
and then it looks like a seed, right?
because you go back and you're looking for those kinds of things.
Right.
For me, the pivotal moment I think for fandom is the handshake, where Hal and Kyle, Hal is back. He comes out of the coffin, does his moment where he says, you get the whole George McFly, "Hey you, get your hands off of that girl" thing, where
Right.
it's Sinestro and
That's
Kyle
true.
and Ali. Um, that whole battle takes place. And by the way, I love the scene where Hal gets blasted across the moon and lands, and he gets up and wipes the blood off his face and smirks.
Yeah, he
Uh,
says that felt good.
yeah, he said that felt good. But once they kind of dispense with Sinestro, Hal's like, "Wait a minute, we got to do this right." And he reaches his hand out and shakes his hand with Kyle. And I thought,
Mm.
how perfectly orchestrated is that to try to put behind the years of Hal fans and Kyle fans going at it with each other? Because we did. I
Still
thought
do.
that still do to some extent. You're right, still do to some extent. I thought, boy, that was really the smart thing to do. Could he have got rid of Kyle? Sure, but I wouldn't. Having gone through it with my favorite character, I certainly want somebody else to go through it. Uh,
Right.
but I think there's room for them all, at least those that were created at that point.
If you're a
Uh,
good writer, you can write them all. You
yeah,
know,
if you can figure it out. I think right now the problem is not enough books for the number of characters we have.
yeah.
We had the explosion and then we had the implosion, and times are lean during the implosion. Starting to get better. We're going to have a Green Lantern Corps book soon, but uh, I I I think the world of this story. It is one of my absolute favorites. In fact, I got this book. I have a sketch by Van Sciver and a signature
Mm.
by Pete Tomasi
That's cool,
in
man.
it. And like I said, I pull it out on a regular basis, and I really don't find fault with any of it. It's unusual for me to look at a book and not really find anything. Yeah, there's a few little glitchy art things here and there, but what this leads to the most commercially and critically successful era for Green Lantern. I mean, by 2009, Green Lantern is supporting 4 or 5 books and is outselling pretty much everything in the DC catalog except for Batman. Never happened before, probably will never happen again.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the ebb and flow is usually kind of sketchy. You know what I mean? It just depends on what time. That's the thing. Like, you can't capture lightning in a bottle twice. Take for instance, a good comparison would be the Harry Potter thing, right?
Sure.
Harry Potter came out and it was huge. It hit at the right moment. It hit with the right chord. It just hit all the elements that it needed to hit, right? And it encapsulated itself in amongst those years of when it was taking place. Fast forward to now, and they want to make a television series out of it, and it's like, I get it, but are you capturing that from back then? Because it's
Right.
different now. You can't do the same thing. You can replicate it in a way to where it has to hit, but it has to hit in a different tone. Now, Green Lantern could do that, but a lot depends on what kind of tone it hits. I mean, you got to hit right at the right moment. It's got to be one of those movies like Iron Man, you know,
Sure. Sure.
and that's what needs
And
to happen. Same thing with Superman. I mean, that's
right.
what has to occur.
But it's not going to happen in a grounded series.
I mean, and let alone detective work that
Right.
there's on Earth. But I mean,
Right.
that's the thing, though. I mean, and it's that can't be that's got to be difficult to do
If they
for
had
any
just
filmmaker.
if they just started with this source material,
I
it's
mean,
all right here.
it's written for you. I mean, geez, I mean, you got so much you could do to fill in the blanks with that. It- just putting sequences in there that can tell stuff that happened prior that led them up to the events during. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know sometimes where the thought processes come from. And, you got a guy like Gunn going in at the helm, and how do you convince a bunch of executives your pathway to a better future, when you don't know what that looks like? I mean,
Right. Right.
he never
Well,
set the tone over in Marvel. He didn't set the
no.
universe over there. He was just on Guardians, you
The
know?
the other thing is from a political standpoint, Jeff Johns' name is not held in very high regard at Warner Brothers. So they're less likely to adapt anything with his name on it,
Right. I mean,
just because of the ramifications of the fact that he worked on the Justice League thing. He's a symbol of the past regime. Justice League didn't do well. He was an executive consultant, creative consultant on the Green Lantern movie that didn't do well. So his name is kind of, I don't want to say persona non grata, but I'm sure they're not that interested in working with him.
well, not only that, I mean, he didn't. I mean, he's left a good track record with his writing material and stuff like that. I just thought when he dabbled in the other stuff, I thought he was always overreaching. I mean, he did well with the CW stuff when he was with Greg Berlanti on that, the Arrowverse. I think he was involved in that for a little bit.
I think for me, the biggest problem was when it came to the TV stuff, I don't think Warner Brothers was this hands-on. But when it comes to the film things, DC's greatest strengths was that they had the backing of Warner Brothers. Their greatest weakness is they have Warner Brothers hovering over them who want to impose the traditional studio mentality on the DC projects. Where Marvel had the benefit was they didn't have a lot of money. They sold their rights away for X-Men and Spider-Man and so on. And they took a risk. They bankrolled their own movie in
Hmm.
Iron Man. If Iron Man wasn't a success, we wouldn't have had any of this stuff. And Marvel would probably have gone belly up by now.
Right, right,
It saved the company. But nobody, no corporate company was telling them what they can do, what they can't do, how long the movie should be, how you should cast it. None of that stuff. When DC jumped on the Green Lantern bandwagon, Green Lantern was at a peak. It was in 2009 when the movie started going into development, but they couldn't get out of their own way. I think honestly, if they had tried to do a DC entertainment like they did, but if they had just given them a pot of money and said, here, as long as you're making money, you'll have money to work with. But if you bomb, that's your problem. You're gone. We're not going to do it anymore.
right.
Instead of trying to get so involved, I mean, looking at the production of the Green Lantern film, you had too many chefs in the kitchen and the studio was trying to dictate casting and it was in conflict with the director and then you had too many people doing the scripts. I mean, the difference between that first draft of the script that's out there and what we ended up with is hugely different. There were things that got cut out of the movie altogether. I mean, there was supposed to be a whole battle on Earth with the Green Lantern Corps. It didn't happen because things kept getting cut and changed because the studio kept changing the goalposts. If they just gotten out of the way, maybe we'd get somewhere. I think Johns could have been very successful if he was allowed to truly have been the Kevin Feige for DC, but he wasn't. He was called in as a creative consultant, but studio politics and the studio mentality got in the way.
Yeah, true enough.
But that's just my
Happy,
opinion. I could be wrong. What do I know? Right. But
but it is all in all, Merry Rebirth,
yeah,
fellow Owens.
that's right. Incredible story. We're not doing a huge deep dive because we would spend hours and hours going through this thing, picking it apart. But it is for me that I remember when taking myself back to that time frame. I had gotten out of comics and I got back into it because of Jeff Johns and JSA. Obviously, had no idea. I'd read Day of Judgment, but it wasn't anything super great. Yeah, Hal was back as the Spectre. I read the Spectre book. But it was Jeff Johns on JSA because my local comic shop, the owner and I were our friends. And he'd said, hey, you really should give this JSA book a shot because I think it's right up your alley. And I started reading it and I fell in love with it. And that's what got me back into comics. So when I saw Jeff Johns' name attached to Green Lantern, I was like, oh, this, I think this is going to be really good. And sure enough, it was fantastic. All right. Was the Jeff Johns run perfect? No. I think after Blackest Night, it struggled with direction a little because I think when he mapped it out to a point, and then he got to that point and he's like, well, this is going gangbusters. I can't walk away now. What do I do now? Uh,
Right.
so I don't know, Phil, in hindsight, does this story hold up 20 years later?
I mean, I think it does. I mean, because you have a lot of source material that you can, I mean, you can go forward with, like you said. I mean, if you're going to draw different clues on putting in stuff like the Sinestro Corps War, I mean, you could even drop more what are those called? You can even drop more clues along the way if you're going to
Sure.
produce something like this. I mean, I think it holds up. I mean, I think it's a good telling for Hal Jordan. I think where it confuses a lot of people is why Hal Jordan's the Spectre. I think that's one. I think that might be one point.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I
that's a fair
read the
point.
Hal, yeah, I read the Hal Jordan Spectre stuff. I thought it was good. I mean, I liked most of it. Um, but I don't think a lot of people would understand. Well, wait a minute, why is Hal Jordan Spectre? And I think what might further that is by confusing them with Parallax.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I, I think
if
you
you,
could resolve that in an animated film or something if you
Mhm.
just had a pre-credit scene that kind of set some of that up.
Yeah, yeah, maybe Hal becoming the Spectre or something like that, and then however many years later you want to put it, and then and then the events pick up. But yeah,
I think one of the things I find about the story is it is just as relevant today as it was in 2004. And I think that's one of the things that Green Lantern as a mythos was lacking was the relevance to what's going on in the world and what is it behind besides just being a superhero book. And
hmm
this brought all of that back and added some more structure.
yep,
But
I agree. It's a great book, man. And anybody who's anybody, I mean, I'm sure that most people have read Rebirth by now. I mean, it's probably part of the Green Lantern curriculum at this point. I mean,
it's required reading.
it should be. It's a good jumping off point for people. I mean, even people who just want to jump into Green Lantern, period, can pick this up because, I mean, everything afterwards, I mean, has Guy, everything has Kyle, I mean, John, I mean, everything moving forward has those guys in it. So, I mean, it's a good jumping off. There's a lot of stuff to read between there and now. Good luck. It's gonna take you a while, but
Very
yeah,
true.
definitely a great book.
All right. Well, we've got some listener feedback to get through. I'm not sure how much we're going to get through tonight because we still have quite the backlog, but we'll come back in a minute or so and we'll start jumping into some of it.
Listen up, all you white circles. This is Drill Instructor Kilowog, and you're listening to the podcast of Oa. And don't you forget it, boozers.
The first message is from Temple 277. He has a question about the Jeff Johns run. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, me again. Just wanted to thank you two for doing a great job with the podcast. I just wanted to ask, what is both of you guys' favorite arc from Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern? As you all know already, mine is GL Rebirth. Legit my favorite story of all time. Sinestro War would have to be a close second though, because the only problem I had with it is the name. It should have been Sinestro War, not Sinestro Corps War. Thanks again, and can't wait for another episode.
Hey, Temple 277, favorite Jeff Johns run. Exactly the episode we were just talking about.
That's right.
Rebirth. I mean, I will say I did think Sinestro Corps War was cooler, but that's only because of the magnitude of all the players involved. I
Yeah. I
mean,
mean,
up the scale from Rebirth.
this was getting the toys out of the toy box and polishing them off, and Sinestro Corps War was actually playing with the toys, right?
That's what it is, right?
And of course, Blackest Night fits in there too.
It
Uh,
does.
a lot of the early part of Jeff's run I really liked, but not really a specific arc. But like Temple points out, Green Lantern Rebirth to me is the touchstone that's the fuse, right? That's the
Mhm.
fuse that lit the bomb that it caused the explosion of
That's
Green
right.
Lantern again. So absolutely, absolutely. All right, Powering, why don't you go ahead and give us the next one?
The next message is from Javon Scruggs 8233. He has some feedback about episode 251 of the Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong event. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
I think you get too hung up on the details of powers. When it comes to crossovers, the characters are put around the same level. When Godzilla crossover with Marvel, Thor acknowledged Godzilla as one of the strongest things he ever faced. Power Rangers, something similar happened. The Jla in this book are not so much the power, it's just the kaiju are just godly strong. The writer even said his intention was not to nerf the League, and even said the Superman in this book is as strong as the main character. We see the Titans mostly match the heroes. Godzilla, the strongest of the Titans, is only able to defeat Superman because he was off guard protecting Shazam. I will say I do like, for as powerful as they make the MonsterVerse kaiju, the DC heroes still hold their own, and heck, they even trap Godzilla himself with end metal chains. We see Godzilla, whose power in this book potentially surpasses Superman, is taken out of the fight not by brute force, but by the heroes thinking smarter, not harder. Trying to outbox Godzilla wasn't working, so they trapped him. Superman coming back was also great, and I love he wasn't interested in fighting, and just freed Godzilla to help save the day. If you notice, once the threat was taken care of, Godzilla stopped attacking them, acknowledging the heroes of DC. Also, Green Lantern Kong was hype.
Jevin Scruggs, thanks for reaching out. Appreciate it. Yeah, maybe I take it a little too seriously. These crossovers, you really kind of have to read with your tongue planted in firmly in your cheek when it comes to a lot of this stuff. It's hard as maybe it's just age, but as I get older, I find it hard sometimes not to look through through things through the lens of, well, if this was real, and I know that's probably the stereotypical comic book geek mentality. But when I can put that aside, I enjoy things a lot more like this. I know when they did the Star Trek Green Lantern crossover, I had some similar nitpicks, but I enjoyed it so much I really didn't pay much attention to it. The Planet of the Apes one, didn't care for that at all. The Justice League Godzilla Kong thing was fun. It just, you have to suspend your disbelief to a point. And yeah, I agree. Green Lantern King Kong was total hype.
Yeah, probably the best. Totally agree.
All right, Power Ring, go ahead and give us another one.
The next message is from Dan, a new listener from Scotland. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Alright guys. Just started listening to your podcast at the beginning of November and I am now on episode 65. I just wanted to let you know that I love the show and it is a great insight to the comics. I haven't read Beyond Blackest Night, but I am now getting back into reading comics. Looking forward to continuing my catch-up on the show.
Daniel from Scotland. Wow, you're far away. Cool, man. Well, hey, keep listening, keep going in, keep diving. There's a lot of episodes that you got to go, so you got a big library ahead of you, and I wish you the best, and I hope you get caught up one of these days.
Exactly. And Daniel, welcome to the core.
Right.
As a person from Scottish heritage, I'm glad to hear from anybody from Scotland. You haven't read past Blackest Night, so boy, do you got a lot of catching up to do. But I hope you enjoy the ride, and I hope whatever you listen to from us helps your fan experience and you get some value out of it. But thanks for joining us, and thanks for contacting us. Power, why don't you give us another one?
Our next listener feedback is from Jay, who has a different take on the upcoming Lanterns show on Max. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Hey all! Just wanted to write in with an alternate perspective on Lanterns, Kyle Chandler and Hal Jordan. I have been reading GL books since the beginning of New 52 and watched the Justice League cartoons as they aired. John Stewart was my first GL, but my favorites are Simon and Jessica. Simon in particular is a character with very little characterization, and I really enjoyed reading his stories to get to know this new guy. But old school fans don't like him because he's not Hal. Ever since I started reading GL books, I always thought that Hal was kind of a boring character. He's not the kind of person that I would want to be, and he's not the kind of person that I would enjoy spending time with. He's been the main guy for a long, long time, and his most iconic stories were not very interesting to me when I tried to go back and read them. Newer Lanterns like Simon and Jessica need page/screen time to develop into deeper characters, and it's never going to happen if every piece of GL media has to hit a bunch of classic Hal, John Guy, Kyle storylines first. Writers need the runway to tell new stories, but a vocal contingent of fans, and I'm not convinced they're the majority, clamor for the same stories from decades ago. All this to say, I am pretty ambivalent about the casting choice of Kyle Chandler as Hal Jordan. I don't mind Hal being old because, one, I don't like Hal and would prefer he just not be in the adaptation at all, too. Hal being older is a story that I haven't already seen a bunch of times, and three, him being an older mentor character could mean that he will exit the show one way or another before the season finale, if Joseph Campbell has anything to say about it. I know that you all and much of your fans are Hal Jordan diehards, but I wanted to give some representation for those of us out here who just want to watch a Riz Ahmed/Gina Rodriguez Green Lantern show.
Hey Jay, welcome to the cast. There's some points you make up. I don't necessarily think that a Simon Babs, Jessica Cruz driven series could work. I think Simon Babs is too much of an unknown, and I think Jessica Cruz is too much of a new minted, hasn't firmly been around. I kind of like her to Mira with Aquaman. I mean, Mira's only been on the scene for the past few, maybe 10 years or so, maybe a little bit longer, as a powerful character. Not saying that she hasn't existed, but I mean, that's kind of the same way I see kind of Jessica Cruz. She's still kind of in her, in her rookie phases, and even though she's been through a lot of trials and tribulations, I don't think injecting her and Simon in the series could be comparable towards who you have them up against.
Yeah, one comment I want to latch onto is old school fans not liking Simon because he's not Hal. For me, as a old school fan, it's not because he's not Hal. It's just because he's not very interesting. He doesn't add anything of value for me that we don't already get from much better characters that are already out there. I'd much rather than devote the page time or screen time to Jessica and Simon or Joe or Kelly Quintella, I would much rather the screen time and page time go to the alien Green Lanterns, which are far more interesting than any of them. I get why you might find Hal boring. I don't find him boring at all. There's a really good video, I'll link to it in the show notes, about Hal Jordan and what he represents and why he's relatable, because he's not someone who's just like we are, but he overcomes all the same fears that we do. And to me, that makes him more relatable. Like a lot of people who have anxiety and stuff latch onto Jessica because they're just like them, which is fine and all, but it's a little bit of a narrow focus about what makes it relatable. And I'm not looking for a character that's like me. And none of these characters are like me. Sure, they might have the same color skin, but that's really where it ends. Or they might be the same gender, whatever. But I just think there's a lot that can be done with these characters that show why they are the iconic versions of these characters. Like I don't want to see a story about Damian as Batman just because it's fresh and new. It's not of interesting to me.
That's right.
But you're entitled to your opinion, and I hope you get out of the show what you like. All right, Power Ring, give us another one.
The next message is from Boris, who also wants to share his thoughts on the upcoming Lantern show. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Hi guys, it's me again, and I'm not even going to mention 2-6. Wait, oops. Anyway, you guys are being a bit negative towards the Green Lantern show, and I completely get it. Green Lantern Cops on Earth isn't my idea of a good pitch for a Green Lantern show, but I'm a human Blue Lantern at heart, and believe there is always hope it'll be good. Personally, Kyle Chandler is too old for my Hal, but honestly, with the amount of Earth Green Lanterns, I'm happy to see a show focus on Jessica or Kyle. I'll even take John or, shockingly, Baz. I don't think I care who's the main Green Lantern as long as they're telling good stories. Want to tell a big Sinestro story, but in the comics it's Sinestro and Hal. Well, it's a new TV continuity, so now it's the same story we all know with the necessary tweaks for it to be Sinestro versus John with all the history they need. Does the actor who plays John want to make a movie which conflicts with Season 2? Fine, he's now the Spectre, because Green Lantern became the Spectre that one time in the comics. It's basically the Marvel approach. Civil War the movie was nothing like Civil War the comics. Hopefully you liked the movie and picked up the comic, and liked the different story with the same themes. If they make the show and it's awful, I'll eat my words but live in hope. Hopefully they are taking the appropriate elements and will make Green Lantern good in live action. Hopefully this show will be the Jon Stewart of DCAU, of my generation, and we'll get new Green Lantern fans. I hope I'm not rambling, and I've made some sense.
Boris, welcome to the show. So, that's the thing about this series being made. You knew there was going to be like, I don't know. I don't know if Marvel, I don't feel like Marvel gets this, but it feels like anything that DC projects and is getting ready to make, it's scrutinized and it's looked at through a microscope. And people seem to want to nitpick and pick up on the smallest things. Now, I'm not saying that the casting of Hal Jordan is any small thing by putting an older character in there. That's not what I'm saying. But that being said, it still draws an ire from fans like, Myron and myself, because the age doesn't fit what I think the role of what a Green Lantern series should take, right? Regardless if it's even Hal Jordan or anybody else for that matter. But Hal Jordan being the prominent character, I think that's an important cog. So hence the negativity towards the casting for it. That being said, I still don't believe how it and think that it's going to work. Now, I'll eat my words when I see it and I'll be like, okay, I can see how it's going to work now, but I'll only when that comes on screen will I be able to put foot in mouth.
Well, I think you'd have talked before. Boris is someone who wants to just see a good story.
Right. And he's fair because we all do.
Sure.
That's
Sure.
just it.
I want to see a good story, but I also want to see it have relevance to what I'm familiar with.
Right.
And that's really the thing. Do I want to see Jessica and Kyle? And no, I don't necessarily. We can get to them. One of the things I have a problem with, we didn't talk about it when we were talking about lanterns in the beginning of the show, was one of the other things that James Gunn has said is that in this timeline of the DCU, at the time of the Superman movie that's coming out, there has not been a Justice League yet. So
we're going back early then.
Well, but we aren't, because Hal's 60 years old.
Oh.
So right. So we're saying that Green Lantern is at this point in his career, and there's never been a Justice League.
Or there's never been a Justice League with Green Lantern on it.
Oh, there's never been a Justice League. He's saying there's no Justice League. It has not existed yet.
So how's this going to fit that, I wonder? If you're going to get, I'm not saying you got to have continuity, but you got to have some kind of threads connect, right?
Hal won't be a part of it.
Okay, fair enough.
That's the reality, right?
Right.
This is being set up to hand it off to John, and then they'll just go on their merry way. Right or wrong? Personally, I think it's wrong. Because why not let everybody win?
I know. Well, we don't need to beat the dead horse. Thanks, Boris. let's get let's listen to our next message.
All right, we got one more left, so we'll do the last one, and then we'll be all caught up. That'd be great.
The last message is from Dan, who has some thoughts about some things he'd like to see the Green Lantern comics address in the future. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, guys. Long-time listener, and your last podcast got me thinking about where Green Lantern will go when the current run ends, and was wondering, what do you two want to see from the other Corps moving forward? It feels most of the other Corps have been in the background now for far too long, and although the current run is fantastic, I do miss all the Spectrum interacting regularly. I would love to see Orange becoming a proper threat again. Larfleeze was great originally, but I feel that character has really dropped off and become one note ever since the Christmas special comic. I think it's time for someone new to take the Orange Lantern and have them be proactive instead of just sitting around and acting as comic relief. I, of course, have to mention Saranic as well. We really need to find out where she is already. I hope we get to see more of her and her father running the Sinestro Corps together. Keep up the good work, guys.
Dan, you took the words right out of my mouth. I want more Larfleeze. That's all I gotta say. I want more Larfleeze. I want more of the orange. I think that's untapped. To be fair, all the lanterns are untapped, and there's so much you can glean from it. But I definitely want to see. Even having him pop up recently has been like tantalizing because it's like, oh, there he is. He's still around. He still looks the same. He doesn't age. He
Yeah.
looks great. I
I,
just,
I honestly feel like the comic book series that they gave Larfleeze hurt the character because they leaned so heavy into the comedic thing
yeah,
that it took away what I liked about how Jeff Johns originally depicted him was that, yeah, there's some humor in it, but the humor is not being intentionally made. It's the humor in the situation, like in the Christmas special.
right.
Once he finds out about Santa Claus, of course he's gonna do what he did. But it's also the fact that he could go from this almost laughable character in 1 second to on a dime spin and be a huge threat. That's one of the things I liked about the character. So I definitely want to see more of that kind of Larfleeze. For me, the biggest question that has been left unanswered since the Robert Venditti run was what happened with the Indigo Tribe and why did they turn on the Green Lanterns? We've seen um, the Indigo Tribe show up. I think there may be only one or two of them left, but I really would like to know the answer to that question: is why did they turn around and be what they are? And I find them still to be one of the most interesting parts of the emotional spectrum because they're not selected for being good; they're selected for being not so good. And the thing that I hope, and I see Adams leaning into it a little bit. One of Jeff Johns' thing about the emotional spectrum is the reason why the Guardians went with green was because it was the most stable. And that green being in the center of the emotional spectrum, you had more control over the emotion than the emotion would necessarily have over you. And the further you went out to the edges of the spectrum, the more the emotion controls you. Red, rage. How many people, go blind with rage? Because the emotion controls you more than you can control it. And the same with the other end of the spectrum. The reason why people are in the Indigo Tribe is because they lack compassion. Probably the best jump is, and actually Indigo isn't at the far end, it's Violet, so Star Sapphire. How many people have done things totally irrational because of love? So finding those things and being out there and playing with that whole spectrum, to me there's still so much there for it. Do I want to see them back? Sure. Do I want to see them be in every single issue? No, I don't. To me, I think like you have to move on from that a little bit. It had its heyday. It still has a place, but I don't think it needs to be in every single issue. Would I like to see maybe a Kyle Rayner White Lantern series? Sure. I could buy into that. I could even buy into if we were going to do an anthology, a tale instead of Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, how about just Tales of the Lantern Corps? And it tells stories about the different ones.
Tales of the Emotional Spectrum.
Sure, sure. I would love to see that. And
Title.
we do need to find out what's going on with Sornik now too.
Yeah, definitely.
Dan is exactly right about that one. We need to
Yes.
find out more. So, yep, totally love it. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for reaching out to us. I'm glad we got caught up with all the listener feedback. We'd like you to be a part of the show. So, Power Ring, why don't you tell everybody how they can be a part of the show? And then we'll come back and we're going to wrap things up.
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, Lantern fans, this is the end of episode number 253. I hope you enjoyed us kind of going back and looking back retrospectively at Green Lantern Rebirth. Phil, I don't know what we're going to do for our next episode, but we're on the cusp of the next issue of the Green Lantern series. I'm still editing the last recording, so I've got to put some energy into getting us caught back up when it comes to that stuff. Maybe we'll record another week. Maybe next week we'll do it again, and we'll talk about the newest issue of Green Lantern.
And we'll probably do that, and then depending on how it works out, we might record before the end of the year, if not after.
Right, because then we'll be buttoned up right close to Christmas.
Yeah, and I don't want, we don't need to release shit over Christmas.
Right.
Right. All right.
All right. Well, friends, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed everything. Hope your holiday season is going well. So until next time, treat each other well, keep that power ring charged, and make every day your brightest day. Take care. Thanks so much for watching this Green Lantern video from the blog of Oa. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find even more great Green Lantern videos, reviews, podcasts, and more at our main website, www.blogofoa.com. So until next time, keep your power ring charged and make every day your brightest day.